November 1st, 1944. A B-17 flying fortress appears over a Belgian airfield. No radio contact, no distress signals. The landing gear drops. The plane lines up perfectly with the runway. Touches down smooth as silk, rolls to a stop. Ground crew rushes to congratulate the pilots on a textbook landing. They open the hatch. Every single crew member inside is dead. This is the story of the ghost plane that flew itself home. The plane is called Phantom Fortress. Tail number 4231068, B-17G model, part of the 91st Bomb Group stationed in Bassingbourn, England. On November 1st, 1944, it takes off as part of a massive formation headed for Cologne, Germany. 360 bombers, over 1,000 crew members. Another day in the strategic bombing campaign that's slowly grinding Nazi Germany into dust. The crew of Phantom Fortress is experienced. They've flown 17 missions together. The pilot is Second Lieutenant John Crisp from Ohio, 23 years old. His co-pilot is Second Lieutenant Harold DeBolt from Pennsylvania. Navigator is Second Lieutenant Robert Williams. Bombardier, Flight Officer Elmer Dietz. Engineer and top turret gunner, Technical Sergeant Lloyd Jennings. Radio operator, Technical Sergeant Michael Sabanek. Ball turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Robert Benninger. Right waist gunner, Staff Sergeant Carl Moore. Left waist gunner, Staff Sergeant Willard Kronk. Tail gunner, Staff Sergeant George Eisel. 10 men, average age 22. Most of them have families back home counting the days until they complete their tour of 25 missions and come home. They're 8 missions away from that goal. 8 more runs and they're done. They just have to survive 8 more trips into the hell of flak and fighter attacks over Germany. The mission briefing is routine. Cologne is a major industrial center and transportation hub. The target is the rail yards. Intelligence expects heavy flak but minimal fighter opposition. The Luftwaffe is running out of pilots and fuel. Most attacks now come from anti-aircraft guns, not fighters. The crews are told to expect accurate 88mm fire over the target, to stay in tight formation, to trust their training. Phantom Fortress takes its position in the formation. Lieutenant Crisp runs through his pre-flight checks. Everything is perfect. The 4 Wright Cyclone engines are purring, fuel tanks are full, bomb load is standard, 5,000 pounds of high explosive and incendiary bombs. The defensive armament is ready, 13 50 caliber machine guns positioned to cover every angle of attack. The plane is as ready as it can be. They take off at 0800 hours. The formation assembles over England, hundreds of bombers joining into combat boxes. The defensive formation designed to maximize overlapping fields of fire. The fighter escorts, P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, take their positions. The entire armada turns east and heads for Germany. The flight across the channel is uneventful. The crews are relaxed, joking on the intercom, dealing with the cold at 25,000 feet the way you deal with anything miserable by making dark jokes about it. The temperature outside is 50 degrees below zero. Inside the plane with heated suits, it's merely freezing. The oxygen masks make conversation difficult, but not impossible. They cross into German airspace. The joking stops. Everyone is scanning the sky for fighters, watching for the telltale black puffs of flak explosions. The bombardier is in the nose, looking ahead for the initial point where they'll begin their bombing run. The navigator is checking his charts, making sure they're on course. The pilot and co-pilot are maintaining position in the formation, watching. The lead plane for any course changes. The flak starts 15 minutes from the target. Black clouds blooming in the sky. Each one representing an 88mm shell that exploded exactly where the German gunners calculated a bomber would be. The calculations are based on altitude, speed, and heading. As long as the bombers maintain their course, the flak can be deadly accurate. But if they break formation to evade, they become vulnerable to fighters. It's a calculated risk. Stay in formation, take the flak, get to the target, drop the bombs, get out. Phantom Fortress is flying in the middle of the formation. Not the safest spot, not the most dangerous. The lead planes take the brunt of the fighter attacks. The tail-end planes get picked off by stragglers. The middle is relatively safe. Relatively. The flak intensifies. The sky around the formation turns black with explosions. The concussions rock the planes. Shrapnel tears through aluminum skin. Some of it is small, making neat holes. Some of it is large enough to sever control cables, destroy engines, kill crew members. The bombardiers are focused on their Norden bomb sights, lining up on the target. The pilots are fighting to maintain course despite the turbulence from the explosions. Then something happens to Phantom Fortress. The exact sequence of events will never be fully known because everyone who experienced them dies. But based on the damage found later, investigators piece together a likely scenario. A flak shell, probably 88mm, explodes close to the plane, very close. The shrapnel tears through the fuselage in multiple places. The bomb bay takes hits. One of the bombs is damaged. It doesn't explode, not fully, but it ruptures. The explosive inside, a mixture of TNT and other compounds, begins burning. Not detonating, burning. The difference is crucial. A detonation would destroy the plane instantly. A burn creates toxic fumes that fill the fuselage. At the same time, other shrapnel damages the oxygen system. The B-17 carries oxygen in large bottles stored throughout the plane. The crew needs it at 25,000 feet where the air is too thin to breathe. If the oxygen system is compromised, the crew has minutes before they pass out from hypoxia. The combination is lethal. Toxic fumes from the burning bomb, compromised oxygen system, and the crew doesn't immediately realize what's happening. Hypoxia is insidious. It doesn't hurt. You just get confused, then sleepy, then unconscious, then dead. And if you're breathing toxic fumes at the same time, the process accelerates. The pilots probably noticed something was wrong first. Maybe an alarm, maybe an instrument reading, maybe just the smell of something burning. Lieutenant Crisp would have immediately checked his gauges. Oxygen pressure dropping. That's an emergency. He would have tried to descend to thicker air, but they're over the target. The formation is committed to the bombing run. Breaking formation now means abandoning the mission and potentially causing a collision with other bombers. So Crisp makes a decision. He'll maintain formation until they drop their bombs, then immediately descend and head for home. It's the right decision tactically. It's fatal for the crew. The bombardier Elmer Dietz is in the nose. He's focused on his bomb sight, lining up the crosshairs on the rail yards below. He doesn't notice the oxygen pressure dropping. He doesn't smell the toxic fumes because he's wearing an oxygen mask. He's probably the first to go unconscious because he's in the nose where the fumes are concentrating. The navigator, Robert Williams, is right behind the bombardier. He's working his charts, calculating the course for home. He notices something is wrong when Dietz stops responding on the intercom. He tries to go forward to check on him. Maybe he gets halfway there before he passes out. In the cockpit, Crisp and DeBolt are fighting to stay conscious. They know something is desperately wrong now. The oxygen gauge is in the red. There's smoke in the cockpit. Crisp reaches for the controls to put the plane into a dive to get down to breathable air. His hand is on the yoke. He pulls back, trying to drop the nose, but hypoxia has already affected his motor control. His movements are sluggish, uncoordinated. The plane begins to descend, but slowly, not the steep dive needed to reach safe altitude quickly. DeBolt tries to help. He's reaching for the throttles, maybe trying to reduce power to help the descent. Or maybe he's just confused, hypoxia playing havoc with his thinking. His hand touches the throttles. Then he slumps forward in his seat. Crisp is alone now. He's still conscious, barely. He can see the altimeter unwinding. 24,000 feet. 23,000. Not fast enough. He needs to get down faster. He tries to push the yoke forward more, but his arms feel like they weigh 1,000 pounds. His vision is tunneling. The edge is going dark. He's gasping for breath, but the oxygen isn't coming. 22,000 feet. His head drops forward onto the control panel. His hands slide off the yoke. The plane is in a shallow descent, engine still running, autopilot not engaged. It's in a gentle dive, losing altitude slowly. In the back of the plane, the other crew members are going through the same process. The Yao, engineer Lloyd Jennings, is in the top turret. He probably notices the descent, tries to call the cockpit on the intercom, gets no response. He starts to climb down from the turret to check on the pilots. Halfway down the ladder, he loses consciousness and falls. The radio operator, Michael Sobonik, is at his station. He's trying to send a distress call, but his fingers won't work right. The message comes out garbled. He slumps over his radio set. The ball turret gunner, Robert Benninger, is in the worst position. He's trapped in the ball turret underneath the plane. It's cramped, cold, isolated. His oxygen line runs from the main system. When that system fails, he has no backup. He probably tries to crank the turret to the exit position so he can climb out, but he passes out before he can complete the rotation. He dies in that cramped metal sphere alone. The waist gunners, Carl Moore and Willard Kronk, are standing at their positions. They see Jennings fall from the top turret. They try to help him, but the toxic fumes are thick in the waist section. They make it maybe 3 steps before they collapse. The tail gunner, George Eisel, is the most isolated of all. He's in the tail section, separated from the rest of the crew by the length of the fuselage. He probably doesn't even know anything is wrong until he tries to call the cockpit and gets no response. He tries to leave his position, to crawl forward, through the fuselage to find out what's happening. He gets maybe 10 feet before the fumes overcome him. He dies in the narrow passage between the tail and the waist section. All of this happens in maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes from the first shrapnel hit to the last crew member losing consciousness. The plane is now flying itself. No one is at the controls. No one is manning the guns. No one is alive to make decisions. Phantom Fortress has become a ghost. But here's where it gets strange. The plane doesn't crash. It should crash. Without a pilot, without anyone adjusting for wind, for the weight change after dropping the bombs, for the gradual fuel burn changing the center of gravity, it should spiral, out of control and slam into the ground. But it doesn't. The autopilot isn't engaged. Investigators confirm this later. The plane is flying itself through pure aerodynamic stability and an almost impossible series of coincidences. The shallow dive Crisp initiated before he died levels, out at around 15,000 feet. At this altitude, the air is denser, the plane more stable. The engines are still running at cruise power. The trim is set almost perfectly for level flight. The formation has moved on. The other bombers completed their runs, dropped their bombs, and headed for England. Phantom Fortress dropped its bombs too. The bombardier's finger was on the release button when he lost consciousness. Either he hit it in his last moment, or the impact of him falling forward pressed it. The bomb bay doors were already open. The bombs fall away. The plane is lighter now, wants to climb. But the nose-down trim from the aborted dive counteracts this. The plane maintains altitude. It flies on, 15,000 feet, heading roughly northwest. The engines are synchronized, running smooth. The fuel flow is steady. There's no one to adjust the mixture, no one to monitor the gauges, but the settings are good enough. The plane flies itself. German fighters spot it. They see a lone B-17, separated from its formation, apparently undamaged. Easy prey. They move in for the kill, but something makes them hesitate. The B-17's gun turrets aren't tracking them. Usually, a bomber's gunners would be swinging their turrets to meet an attack. This one's guns are motionless. The fighters approach closer, still no defensive fire. They can see into the cockpit now. No movement. They fly alongside, looking for the trap. Is this a decoy? Is there a formation of P-51s hiding in the sun waiting to pounce? But there's nothing. Just this one bomber flying straight and level, no one at the controls. The German pilots are spooked. There's something wrong here, something unnatural. One of them later reports that he could see the pilot slumped forward in the cockpit, clearly dead or unconscious. But the plane was flying perfectly, like it was being piloted by a ghost. They don't shoot it down. Maybe they're out of ammunition. Maybe they're unnerved by the sight of a plane flying with a dead crew. Maybe they think it's already doomed and not worth wasting bullets. They break off and head back to base. Phantom Fortress flies on. It crosses back into Belgium. The Allied anti-aircraft gunners spot it. They hold fire because it's clearly an American plane. They watch it fly overhead. Notice it's alone, assume it's damaged and heading for an emergency landing. They radio ahead to warn the airfields. The plane is descending again now. Very gradually, losing maybe 100 feet every few minutes. The fuel is burning off. The plane is getting lighter. The balance is shifting. It should be unstable. It should be yawing, pitching, rolling. But somehow, through pure aerodynamic luck, it remains mostly level. It approaches the airfield at Cormeilles-en-Vexin in Belgium. This is a grass airfield, recently captured from the Germans, now being used by Allied fighters and reconnaissance planes. The control tower spots the B-17 approaching from the east. They try to make radio contact. No response. They fire flares. No reaction. The plane just keeps coming. The tower controller watches through binoculars. The landing gear starts to drop. This is impossible. The landing gear on a B-17 is hydraulically operated. It requires someone in the cockpit to move a lever. But he watches the main gear extend and lock. The nose gear follows. The plane is lining up with the runway. The controller is screaming into his radio now, warning everyone to clear the field. This bomber is coming in hot, no one responding, probably going to crash. Fire trucks and ambulances start rolling toward the runway. Phantom Fortress is at 500 feet now, descending toward the runway. The approach is too steep, too fast. It's going to overshoot or slam in hard. But then something changes. The nose comes up slightly. The descent rate decreases. The plane is flaring, the same maneuver a pilot makes just before touchdown to bleed off speed and settle gently onto the runway. It crosses the runway threshold. The main gear touches down. Not hard, not soft, just right. The plane settles onto the grass. The tail wheel drops. The bomber is rolling down the runway, slowing naturally from drag and friction. It rolls for maybe 800 feet, then gradually comes to a stop. The ground crew is stunned. They just watched a perfect landing. Textbook. Better than most pilots could do. They're running toward the plane, ready to congratulate whoever just pulled off an incredible piece of flying. The first man reaches the fuselage, pounds on the side, yells for the crew to open up. No response. He climbs up, opens the waist door. The smell hits him immediately. Chemical. Wrong. Death. He looks inside and sees bodies. One slumped by the radio. One collapsed on the floor. He backs out, yelling for a medic. More ground crew arrive. They open the nose hatch. The bombardier and navigator are both dead in their positions. They go to the cockpit. Both pilots are slumped in their seats. Clearly gone, the co-pilot's hand is still on the throttles. The pilot's head is resting on the control panel. They search the entire plane. All 10 crew members are dead. Some are at their stations. Some collapsed, trying to reach other parts of the plane. The tail gunner is found in the passageway. The ball turret gunner is still in his turret. All dead. Most appear to have died from hypoxia and toxic fume inhalation. There are no traumatic injuries, no blood, no signs of struggle. They just stopped breathing. The investigators arrive. This is unprecedented. A plane with a dead crew somehow flew itself across Germany and Belgium, descended on its own, dropped its landing gear, lined up with a runway, and landed itself. The probability of this is astronomical. Every single thing had to go exactly right. The initial damage had to be survivable for the aircraft. The dive had to level out at exactly the right altitude. The engines had to keep running perfectly, synchronized. The fuel distribution had to remain balanced. The wind had to be minimal. The approach to the airfield had to be perfect. And the landing gear. That's what haunts the investigators the most. The landing gear doesn't just drop on its own. It has to be activated. There's a lever in the cockpit. Someone has to move it. But both pilots were dead. The engineer was dead. No one was in the cockpit when the gear came down. They examined the lever. It's in the down position. They checked the hydraulic system. It worked normally. The gear extended because someone or something moved that lever. But who? Or what? The ground crew swear they saw movement in the cockpit just before the landing gear dropped. A shadow, a shape, something. But when they opened the cockpit, both pilots were clearly dead. Bodies already cold, rigor mortis setting in. They'd been dead for over an hour. The official report is clinical. Aircraft suffered battle damage resulting in oxygen system failure and toxic fume inhalation. All crew members succumbed to hypoxia. Aircraft continued on autopilot and landed by chance at Cormeilles-en-Vexin airfield. Cause of landing gear deployment undetermined. But that word, undetermined, that's what keeps people talking about this case for the next 80 years, because the autopilot wasn't engaged. The investigators confirmed it. The switch was in the off position. The plane flew itself home through aerodynamic stability alone, and somehow, against all odds, it landed. There are theories. Some say the landing gear lever could have been bumped during the pilot's death throes, set in a position that would allow it to drop once hydraulic pressure built up. But the engineers say that's not how the system works. The lever has to be deliberately moved to the down position and held there until the gear locks. Others suggest the co-pilot, in his last moments, might have reached for the gear lever thinking it was something else, accidentally putting the gear down. But the timing doesn't work. The co-pilot died over Germany. The gear came down over Belgium more than 30 minutes later. Some think turbulence could have shaken the lever into the down position. But the flight was smooth that day, no storms, minimal wind, and the lever has a safety that prevents accidental deployment. You have to squeeze it to move it. The most prosaic explanation is that someone on the ground saw the B-17 approaching, realized it was going to land with gear up, and assumed the crew had extended it remotely or that it dropped automatically. But B-17s don't have automatic gear extension. And there's no remote system. Multiple witnesses, including the tower controller, reported watching the gear extend while the plane was on approach. So what really happened? How did Phantom Fortress land itself with all crew dead? The rational answer is coincidence. A series of incredibly unlikely events that aligned to allow the aircraft to fly itself home and land. The damage was just right to kill the crew, but leave the plane flyable. The dive leveled out at exactly the right altitude. The trim was set perfectly. The engines ran flawlessly. The fuel balanced itself. The approach to the airfield was ideal. And the landing gear, through some mechanical quirk no one can explain, extended at exactly the right moment. But the human mind doesn't like coincidence, especially not when it involves 10 dead men and a plane that flew itself home like it was trying to save its crew, even though they were already gone. The crew of Phantom Fortress were buried with full military honors. Their families were told they died in combat over Germany, which was true. They weren't told about the ghost flight, about the impossible landing, about the plane that brought them home even after they were dead. That detail stayed classified for years because the Army Air Force didn't want to deal with the questions, the speculation, the ghost stories. But the story leaked out. It always does. The ground crew at Cormeilles talked. The investigators talked. Soon every bomber crew in the European theater knew about Phantom Fortress, the plane that flew itself home. Some took it as a good omen, the B-17 protecting its crew even in death. Others saw it as creepy, unnatural, a reminder that sometimes the war produced things that couldn't be explained. The plane itself was repaired and returned to service. The toxic residue was cleaned out. The oxygen system was replaced. The shrapnel damage was patched. It flew more missions, with new crews who didn't know its history. Or maybe they did, and flew it anyway, because you flew what you were assigned. After the war, Phantom Fortress was scrapped like thousands of other B-17s. Melted, down for aluminum. There's no memorial, no plaque, nothing to mark what happened. Just a few photographs in archives and a file in the National Archives labeled Unexplained Aircraft Event, November 1944. But the story persists. It gets retold with different details. Different airfields, different dates. Some versions have the crew dying from flak wounds. Some say German fighters shot them but left the plane intact. Some claim the plane circled the airfield 3 times before landing, like it was checking the approach. None of those versions are accurate, but they all share the core truth. A B-17 Flying Fortress landed itself with all crew dead. The landing gear deployed on its own. The plane flew for over an hour without anyone at the controls. It found an airfield and put itself down on the runway like an experienced pilot was flying it. And no one, not the investigators, not the engineers, not the pilots who studied the case, no one has ever been able to fully explain how that happened. The official reports use words like aerodynamic stability and fortunate circumstances and unexplained mechanical activation. But what they mean is, we don't know. This shouldn't be possible. But it happened. That's what makes the story of Phantom Fortress so compelling. It's not a ghost story in the supernatural sense. There are no specters, no voices from beyond, no paranormal phenomena. It's just physics and probability doing something that physics and probability say is virtually impossible. 10 men died that day. They were doing their duty, flying into danger because their country asked them to. They didn't get to complete their tours, didn't get to go home, didn't get to see their families again. But their plane, that marvel of American engineering, that flying fortress that was supposed to protect them, brought them home anyway. It couldn't save their lives, but it could bring them back. And somehow, through a combination of aerodynamic luck, mechanical chance, and something we might never understand, it did exactly that. It flew itself across enemy territory, found a friendly airfield, and landed like someone who cared was at the controls. Maybe that's the real story of Phantom Fortress. Not that it was haunted or supernatural, but that even in death, even when all hope was lost, the machine kept trying to complete its mission, get the crew home. That was always the mission. And Phantom Fortress, with no one alive to fly it, completed that mission one last time. The ghost plane, the Phantom Fortress, the B-17 that landed itself with all crew dead. It happened once, on November 1st, 1944, over Belgium. And if you don't believe it, the records are there. The photographs exist. The witnesses testified. The plane was real, the crew was real, the landing was real, and to this day no one can fully explain how.